residence at UCSD after a career as a chief medical officer of Kaiser, and he also works with some investment groups as well on the East Coast. So John is going to orchestrate two different presentations. We're also joined by our friends here from Goodwin, the law company, intellectual property law company, who are going to make some comments on the regulatory and IP landscape for these kind of innovations. Okay, so I'm going to let John take over from here.
Thanks so much. And as anticipated, the diehard people who stayed around to the very end of this conference are going to get the most exciting presentation today. Fish asked me if I knew a couple of great AI companies that could illustrate really breakthrough kind of technology based upon AI. And I immediately thought of the two you're going to hear from. Emmanuel Lerman is a professor and a physician here at UCSD and has pioneered some really cool sensor technology that is going to blow the doors wide open on a lot of different issues. And I liken it to the discovery of the telescope, the discovery of the microscope, and opening whole new vistas. And so I also like to think about how the human biology is actually a biologic internet comprised of multiple biologic intranets: the brain, the genome, the microbiome, the endocrine system, the peripheral nervous system. But what he's doing with a non-invasive sensor is just opening the doors on what has been a black box in healthcare, a very frustrating black box of what's going on in the autonomic nervous system. So his findings are just remarkable very early on. And then Manju represents a team of engineers and a large cohort of AI experts who have developed a humanoid robot that he's going to talk about. And are we going to be able to talk to her after the panel?
We are. They've gone to bring her. They'll send her up now.
Okay, she was hitchhiking in the back of his car. They're bringing her in, hopefully, but before we're done here. And then we have the two legal experts. So for those of you who have been here throughout the day, there are a couple of issues that came up that I think we're going to address here. So there was a lot of discussion about empathy and how do you train empathy to medical students, how do you select empathy. And Manju and Shubha and I and others spent a couple hours yesterday with Professor Mobley of UCSD, who heads up the Institute on Empathy and Compassion. And so we have some very exciting kinds of opportunities to collaborate with a humanoid robot and empathy for training medical students not only to be more empathic, but how to do better interviews with patients. So let's go ahead and get started. And Dr. Emmanuel Lerman is going to talk about some really interesting stuff that he's been doing with a sensor that his team pioneered in the last couple of years.
Yep, awesome. Thanks so much, John. It's awesome to be here in this beautiful room. My gosh, look at this place. It wasn't here a few years ago, and now these buildings are mushrooming up. So, really nice to be part of this group and to be here for what this institute stands for, right? So, we're really pumped about innovation. I think there's no other place that I've been at some of the best institutions at Mass General, at Yale, but you really get a sense of how innovation at its core and being able to interact across many different departments and interests coalesce here at UCSD. And I find it just amazing that we can knock on somebody's door, email them, and be able to solve problems.
In the interest of time, let's hold questions until after Manju's spoken, and then we can have a longer discussion and weave in some of the IP and regulatory issues. So we'll go ahead and take the podium. Can't do. But remember the questions you were about to ask.
All right.
It's always up to you at the end of the day, and I have no slides, so we'll try to make this fun and easy. But I'm Manju Kisani. We are here with my colleagues, Shiba, Sujit, and Kanush. We are an AI venture studio based out of India. Although Sujit here is the only one here today who's from actually from India. Shiba and Kanush are in California, and I live in London. And what we've done is we've built a purpose-driven AI venture studio where we launch AI businesses from our own proceeds of other businesses that we have. When I say we're purpose-driven, we like to solve really hard problems that are, if solved, will help uplift humanity. So that's our, sort of, if you will, our guiding principle. Since 2017 was really when we began getting into AI, and we realized that being an engineering firm, all of us are engineers. We realized the real challenge was there aren't enough engineers who know this stuff and understand this stuff. So we started a school to upskill and train engineers. Since that point in time, we've ingested 7,000 students into our school of AI, and we've graduated 2,000 engineers. And average age of an engineer who graduates from our program is 36 years old, so we're upskilling talented folks. And then we just use that as our lead fund for hiring the best and the brightest minds from our school to help us launch new businesses. So some of the businesses that we launch, are really hard engineering, but they're, again, purpose-driven. For example, we're building 18 to 45 ton electric trucks in India that are with an AI assist on it. Why do we build electric trucks? Well, because 40% of the pollution in India is caused by 2% of the vehicles, which are the trucks. So those are the types of problems we like to eliminate, because you think about the health outcomes for us. Well, not as bad because we're indoors and we're in protected environments, but at the bottom of the pyramid, they're all outdoors all the time. They're breathing all that pollution in. So if we don't lean in to solve that problem, then I don't know who will. So another thing, and what we're really here to talk about today, is our humanoid robots. So we build humanoid robots. These robots, why did we get into humanoid robots? Because we have a fundamental belief that humanoids are required in the future and will uplift humanity. And why do I say that? Most of the humanoids you see around are what I call pick-and-place robots. You pick up a box in one place and you put it down in another place. That's sort of what a lot of companies are focusing on. We are focusing on a different type of robot. We are focusing on a companion robot. Sadly, John, there's a technical issue. Well, not technical issue. We just didn't have the computer to sort of boot her up. Uh-huh. So the robot's in the car, but not the computer. Sorry. But we'll schedule a time. She's always on campus. She, in fact, lives on the 4th floor. She has an office up on the 4th floor in this building. Not a joke, or actually real statement, truth. But our humanoids, we want them to be companion robots. If you think about why is it that we want companion robots, again, we're purpose-driven. There has to be an underlying reason for these things first. Loneliness is a real problem. If you look at it, especially in the elderly population, loneliness, the studies say, are shaving 8 years off the lives of our senior citizens in this country. There's studies that say that the moment you check your family member into an assisted living facility or care home with the hope that they will prosper, do well there, it actually shaves another 6 years off their lives, right? And there's a number of reasons why, but loneliness is a big part of it at the end of the day. So that's the type of problem we wanted to solve. So we build humanoid robots to be companions. And as we've gone down this journey to build humanoid robots to become companions, one thing really became clear. AI is very, very kind of rational at the end of the day. And we as humans are not, right? And the intersection between the two is this rich area that we need to address, the intersection between robots and humans, which is empathy, right? And I heard that you had a lot of discussion about empathy. So where did we land on this is for a companion, to be a true companion robot, we have to work together to solve for empathy in AI. And that's where we're spending most of our time now. And if we solve for the empathy in AI, then our humanoid will be not a psychopath, right? Because what's the definition of a psychopath, really? It's someone who fakes the empathy in order to get a response, right? And so we can train a robot to fake empathy, but it's not real empathy, right? And so how do you really develop a really empathetic AI so that when they interact with humans in the companion role, it's legitimate. So that's kind of what we're spending a lot of time on with John and others in the university campus. But that's I guess enough for me. John, if there's anything else you want me to
Yeah, that was perfect. The one thing I would add is that in our discussions with Professor Mobley yesterday, he pointed out that empathy is more complex than most of us realize. There's a clear distinction between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. And how that emerged from the discussion is I met the chair of pediatrics at a medical school about 15 years ago, who was selecting highly emotionally empathic medical students to become pediatricians and then putting them through a course. Thank you. Putting them through a course on how to manage their emotional empathy down, to retain their cognitive empathy, but manage the emotional response to him. Because those of you in the audience who are hyperempathic with the emotional side realize that burnout is magnified in people who are empathic. And so one of the things we're hoping to do with this robot is to be able to train it to be empathic for all the right reasons and to be highly available for those who need that kind of interaction because of loneliness. And at the same time, train medical students how to cultivate and develop their cognitive empathy so that they're more effective at eliciting legitimate, detailed histories without the person feeling offended or rushed or pick your adverse outcome from a typical clinical encounter today, and that they can manifest cognitive empathy without experiencing the burnout that is very common in physicians. A lot of reasons for burnout that are not related to empathy, but those physicians who are empathic are burning out supremely on top of all the other time pressure, guilt over not having enough time to deal with all the problems. So this is a very, I mentioned to Manju that we had talked about empathy in several of the prior talks today. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges in healthcare today, because burnout is causing people not to go into medicine, it's causing people to leave medicine in droves, and teaching them how to be empathic to provide better care, more satisfying care to the patients, and a more manageable lifestyle and life for the physician themselves. It comes back to the quintuple aim that was talked about earlier, is protecting the mental health of the caregivers themselves. So we're very excited, and Dr. Mobley, who is a recognized authority, has a whole department here at UCSD on the study of empathy and compassion. And so what we anticipate will be happening in this collaboration with this department could be one of the key answers for addressing burnout in healthcare at scale. It's not just physicians, it's nurses, it's pharmacists, it's the care team in general that is really causing a decline in the quality of care, the quality of people going into medicine, the quality of people staying in medicine who are not leaving because of burnout. So and when you say you lean into uplifting humanity, this is a global problem. It's just not the U.S. I mean, it's every country in the world now is experiencing this physician burnout. Pre-existed COVID, but it's been amplified dramatically by COVID. So in terms of problems leading to, in my view, addressing this issue in healthcare is absolutely critical. So did you want to
just one thing?
Sure.
I'm sorry, John, to interrupt you.
No, please.
I just want to say when I say we lean in, one of the reasons we're actually, and the main reason we're actually here is because these problems are too big for any one company, individual, or group of people to solve. They require a broad, multidisciplinary team to really approach this from multiple different angles. Not the least of which is ethics. So in UCSD, we've been across most of the top universities in the U.S. We partnered with some of them in the past, and we couldn't find an environment that we felt like was the right environment to try and achieve something as lofty as these goals, but until we came to San Diego. And this environment just been amazing for us. So I think that we've really got a chance of working together as a team of really pushing the science forward here.
And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Larry Smarr and Cal IT2, he really pioneered the notion of collaboratory, bringing people from multiple disciplines into a single environment to solve big area problems like this that are intrinsically multidisciplinary. And then Chancellor Kozla is absolutely all in on this issue for the university as a whole. He's very intimately aware of this project and very supportive of this project. So we think UCSD is going to become, as a result of this collaboration, going to become a real pillar of interdisciplinary success in tackling really complex problems that really matter in the healthcare and the health of our society. So I say we're really excited about how all the pieces are coming together. We're running kind of late-ish. How much, because I want to make sure they get to bring in their views and lead IP and regulatory, but I also want to make sure we have time for Q&A. I'm hoping there's some good questions.
Yeah, we're still on time. At 4 o'clock, we have till 4:30.
Okay, great. Okay, perfect. So, thanks, Manju, and, yeah.
I'll ask questions. Hi, this is Kristen Hranek. I'm an IP attorney. I have an engineering degree. I've worked in industry as an engineer for a bunch of years before I went to law school, and then I've worked primarily with small startups, et cetera, and helped them through their IP strategy and then helping them, end up in market. And so I love working with research organizations because they can address lofty goals. But I always tend to go, okay, well, then how are you going to get this to market with your commercial? And how do you envision that? And how have you designed maybe your IP strategy, if you have one, or thought through that to make sure that you have a commercial end result that is protected? And I don't know how you think about that in the research.
I won't lie, this particular issue, we just haven't put enough thought into it, right? That is definitely one of the areas we need to think about. Of course, for this, it has to be a sustainable model. And for it to be sustainable, it means that in our world, it needs to be a good business.
It has to be a business, that's right.
Yeah.
So it has to be something that you can protect, you can you've seen that maybe so many investors because you've got this self funding sort of
never
world,
taken external money.
but nevertheless, it needs to sustain itself and help feed the next one, right? So,
Yeah.
so I think that's something that you really do need to think about early, so that I love research organizations because they are publishing, and that's often a goal that you often need to make sure you're looking at that protection earlier. And it sounds like, Emmanuel, you've got that under your belt.
Before Emmanuel answers,
Yeah.
can I just add one layer
Sure.
on to what Manju stated? So I like to think about it as missionary mercenary quotient. How much are you trying to uplift the world as your primary motive, and how much are you trying to create a revenue stream and a profitable commercial entity? And so what Mashami, the company that Manju, Shu, and others on this project have done is they have a very, very high mission that they're aspiring to. But back to the point of sustainability, that sometimes you file offensive patents to say, this is my turf, stay off it altogether. And sometimes you file more defensive patents where you may be, because you're on a mission at large, you may want to allow others to pursue the same goal, to uplift humanity together collaboratively, potentially. But what you don't want to do, and this is, I think many of us have seen this more than a few times, someone gets wind of your idea, they patent it, and they come at you for pursuing what you have invented because they filed the patent first. And so that kind of defensive patenting is something that I think is pretty essential to move this forward. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I was thinking about that in the sense of, the goal of patent law, right, and the big picture of the world is to disclose what is your secret sauce, to give society an advantage of knowing what that is and being able to invent on top of it, but wait 20 years till you get out there, right? So that's you get your monopoly for 20 years. and then you get to pursue it after that. But you do have to put your stake in the sand at some point. And in a way, it's almost like open source, but you have that delay, right? Because everybody can use it eventually, but not right now. So that's sort of my big picture thought on that is you do need to get in there because in the end, I love the lofty goal and I think it's so meaningful, but how many have I seen that will never get to market?
100% agree with you.
100%, yeah.
Remember, we're a venture studio, and so in our AI venture studio, half the business is already profitable, and they do have IP in those businesses that we protected, right? In this particular instance, what we're talking about now, the robotics business, on the creation of empathetic AI, I don't know what we're going to protect there.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know yet. We're too early in the journey to even sort of form a thought on that until we have a good, solid, multidisciplinary team. And you know, the idea of empathy, you know, in AI is really complex, really by an order of magnitude complex, right?
And how it's more how it's going to be implemented is probably what you're going to get.
And also, I mean, I wonder also, to be perfectly honest with you, if it is something that we should, if we crack the code on it, should we patent it and prevent others from using it or not? I don't know the answer to that question too.
Well, you can decide how you do, right? So if you decide you want people to use it, you can grant licenses and not worry about how much money you're getting out of it, but you can still keep maybe others that are not that don't have such lofty goals in mind or end results in mind from doing it. So you could think of it that way too.
Yeah.
Well, there's sort of a famous model of one approach from a very quirky individual by the name of Elon Musk, who open sourced his IP
Right.
on electric cars.
Right.
Because his goal was not, at the time he decided to do that, his goal was not to be the richest person in the world. His goal was to combat climate change and wanted others to follow his path.
Yeah, and it's options.
Yeah.
It's options, right? Gave him options.
Right.
Sure.
I'm trying to say one thing, like the point of the patent system is to encourage innovation. And the issue with AI sometimes is it's preempting a field, like you're detecting something natural. And so we don't want people to not be able to innovate. And so the tricky part with AI and patenting is how to find that balance of where you're giving something to society through the patent system versus just blocking everyone by saying, I've discovered this, that's naturally occurring and no one else can do it. And so I think this current patent law in the US at least is trying to strike that balance, and with the consideration that innovation is important, we want people to be encouraged to do it. And so we're not gonna just give people these blanket patents, block everybody.
Well, and for initiatives like both of these that are very capital intensive, what investor is going to throw millions of investment capital at a startup if they think that anybody else can be a close follower and seize the market from under their investment? So it is a virtuous cycle.
It is, and I mean, it always comes back to patent, trade secret, right?
Right.
And so if you can reverse engineer, or if you can see from the goal and the end result, how to get from that point A to point B, you should patent it, right? If you can reverse engineer, or you can see, given a goal and given the end result, how to get there, patent it. But otherwise, it's trade secret. But that's hard to explain to some who want to invest in the traditional value of patent.
And do you want to repeat your question for Emmanuel?
Not to remember. So it sounds like you actually have done more on the patent side, because you have a physical device that seems like it's going more traditional route.
Yeah, and we are a startup.
Right.
And so we're scrappy and doing everything we can. Actually, you asked about our strategy. Our strategy is to get investment to make more patents.
Okay.
Right. So our first tranche of money is to ensure that we have the funds to kick out at least, we're shooting for 20 per year.
Okay.
Right. So, and it's really not just to kind of say, okay, well, this is making us more valuable. More so, it's allowing us to push the science as well as to provide those points of value, not just intellectually, not just monetarily, but that we can use and actually implement in the healthcare setting. So that's, it's always, like you said, a double-edged sword of what is the intellectual endpoint, right? Is it that I just want to be able to prove that we can do these specific modeling approaches, or is it to provide, again, this monetary value? I think in this case, and in regard to mission versus mercenary, I do hope that our modeling approaches will provide huge benefit to the healthcare system, to multiple individuals, for precision medicine. But I don't necessarily think that we should, need to open source it right away. But I do think there's a place for, say, nonprofit organizations, right? Where, like, if there is a way to provide a license, free of charge to a certain nonprofit organization that allows them to use this technology to improve healthcare, then that's something we're very interested in. And open source and open everything, which we've seen a few companies do in the healthcare domain, and I think it's actually impressive, right? And it also just answers all these questions. Like, I've seen companies that are already putting their FDA regulatory files online for everybody to see what they're doing. And in a field that's burgeoning or up and coming, where there's really no clear past, it's something that can be put their mark in the field, or their flag in the soil, and say, look, we were the first ones to do this. Yes, it's open source, but look, we're the ones that are innovating at the front edge. So I think there's lots of different ways to approach it.
Yeah.
And one other point relevant to that is Karan Singh earlier today alluded to the reproducibility problem with AI in general, and there's a great paper in Nature last December on the reproducibility crisis of AI in science. And the problem is, if you just publish the outcomes and don't reveal anything inside the black box, the reproducibility of that is very, very compromised. So you can have a product, but you don't know how reproducible it is. There's lots of tricks in AI, like random forest testing to see how generalizable something is. But the issue is, how much do you have to reveal in order to have predictive value in the reproducibility of a particular application of AI in different geographic locations, in different cultures, with different patient cohorts. And so there's this dilemma of that hasn't been worked out at a regulatory level, and it is something that is hotly debated, but we're still so early in the AI world to understand some of these issues that there isn't a clear path to how to resolve this on the one hand. On the other hand, things are evolving so quickly, and there's so much danger when there isn't established principles for reproducibility for people adopting, like the graph that Karan showed, different hospitals using exactly the same AI solution set, coming up with predicted value 55% versus 80%. Those are dramatic changes. There are lots of other factors other than what was revealed inside the black box, like workflow and so forth. But these are some of the major issues. Why don't we do this, if it's okay? Can we open it up to questions?
Absolutely.
So any questions for any of the panelists, please bring them forward.
Did you have a question?
Actually,
Please.
I was going to comment about this. There's been a lot of discussion around empathy, and I just would say, so my perspective is informed by being in medical education for over 30 years. I'm currently the associate dean for graduate medical education. So at UCSD, we have 150 programs and 1,100 trainees, a lot of people in this space. And what I want people to recognize is, when people come to med school, we select a group, their empathy is actually quite high, and what happens over time is it degrades. And so why does that happen? And some parts of it it's the result of some of the engineered solutions that have been thrust upon our systems. So if you look at a patient who's hospitalized, the doctors in the hospital spend about 15% of their day with that patient, and 85% is feeding the machine, the EMR, everything else. So, and these issues of workload that you heard about, Longhurst alluded to, people are working constantly. And so if you have to see in an outpatient environment, 10 patients in a half day, 20 patients in a day, document, answer things, you can imagine where your empathy goes.
And then you go home and you have 2
And
hours of emails.
And this has just gotten worse over time. So I would love, as we're coming up with these really interesting AI-driven ideas, to stop and think, what is that going to mean for the clinician in the hospital, in the clinic? How is it going to help to address these issues? If it just adds more burden through data, it's going to further degrade the empathy, and we'll really need the robots. Physicians themselves are natively empathetic, and just think about that as we're talking today and tomorrow about what the solutions will do and how they'll positively impact and bring back time for for physicians to be with their patients and to regain the joy, the reason why they went into this in the first place. They're definitely not, it's not that they need more training, it's that they need to have the spaces that allow this to happen.
Well, very well framed, and there's a couple things that I think are relevant. So part of it is the demand on the healthcare systems is going up, and the supply of physicians and nurses is going down proportionate relative to the demand because of burnout. And so we're in kind of a vicious tailspin here, with the more people that leave the profession, the more burden is on those who remain, and the more burnout those staying in the game have. And so there's a couple of things. So one is this distinction of Dr. Mobley makes here at the Center for Empathy and Compassion is distinguishing between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. So the emotional empathy is what burns you out. Cognitive empathy is what allows you to be effective. So he's developing training programs that address that distinction. And I think that's one of the things why he's really interested in Rhea, the robot, who is being trained to be empathic and to help train medical students how to have an empathic cognitive approach without the burden of the emotional impact on them. The second thing is a lot of what's burning people out is not what happens during the day. They go home so they can have dinner with their children and their families, and then they do 3 hours of desktop medicine at home with answering emails, reviewing lab results, reviewing x-rays, feeling guilty that they never end the day being caught up with anything. And the guilt and the moral injury of always feeling like you should have done better, but you didn't have enough time is really profound. So one of the things that I think really needs to happen, independently of the work that we presented today, and this came up earlier today with a question about why aren't patients' data being entered into the chart, either from Fitbits or Apple Watches or whatever. That is actually happening here at UCSD. I led a pretty large project to do that at my former institution. And the problem is the volume of data has not been transformed into easily actionable heat maps and options. So the example I've given for a long period of time is that, and this happens 1,000 times a day, a 40-year-old woman comes in and has nuance and hypertension and diabetes, and the doc says, I've got 3 options for you. We can give you a drug for your hypertension, a drug for your diabetes, you come back in 3 months. I can tell you how to totally radically change your lifestyle without any drugs, or we can do a little bit of both. And the woman says, well, the reason I'm so stressed out and my blood pressure is so high is because my daughter's getting married in 3 months and I can't stand my in-laws. And I'm so stressed out about hosting them for the wedding and all the wedding preparation, all that. So give me the drugs now, and then when the wedding's over and the in-laws are out of town, I will go for broke on those lifestyle changes. So how do you look at the data input into the construction of those options? How do you present those options in ways that are culturally sensitive and medical literacy sensitive to the individual, so that you can very quickly, with the aid of a computer and visualization tools, explain to people in a language that's familiar to them and culturally sensitive
about what their options are, help them make the decision that's right for them at that moment in time and guide them through that process. I've been giving that talk now for 15 years, and I've yet to see a really good implementation of those kind of visualization tools and heat maps to support the optionality for shared decision-making to overcome that. So I think teaching empathy and how to, and I'm not an expert on this, Dr. Motley is, but how to emphasize the cognitive empathy and protect them against the burden of the emotional empathy, and then simplifying the process of having an enlightened discussion with an individual that's relevant to them in ways to use appropriate visualization tools and shared decision-making, whether in person or remotely, I think are two of the critical keys. But the other thing is we've got to put a stop to this death spiral of the most empathic people leading the profession because they're burned out and people left each carrying a larger burden. So I'm very worried. I think we're all very worried about where things are going with healthcare, which is why these kind of initiatives are really being embraced by the Chancellor, Dr. Motley, and multiple departments in UCSD. So I'm very excited about how we can begin to address those issues, but it's a pretty strong headwind we're racing into. Other questions? Or do you want to respond?
I was just going to say, we talked about responses and neural responses and when we do neuroimaging and look at the brain response, and time is everything, right? So you have a set amount of time that you were able, like if I show you an image for a certain amount of milliseconds, you're not going to see it, right? But if I give it to you for a longer period of time, you're going to process it. I think I think the most important thing is time with our patients. When I see them in clinic, it's if we don't have the time and we're being pushed to see, like you said, 20 patients a day, right? The capability for a physician to actually engender and understand what's going on with that person is you just can't do it if you don't have enough time. And so I think there's a threshold that we're rapidly approaching where there's no way that you're going to be able to have empathy with these people unless you have the time.
I mean, we've crossed that threshold.
Right.
So that is, and again, I swim in these waters. This is the world I work in at UCSD. So I'm proud of this place and the things we've done, but I have concerns around these issues. And some of the things we're talking about are marginal changes when the larger system, which could change, is not necessarily interested in doing so. And that's something that.
And part of it is the underlying business model of the majority of healthcare being fee-for-service. So when I mentioned my prior institution was Kaiser Permanente, I led the digital transformation there. What I will tell you is and Epic was the 7th electronic health record I either developed or implemented. And when we implemented that to 20,000 plus physicians and an organization of 212,000 users, there was a lot of stress, a very sharp peak in stress with each deployment. And so what we found is we could identify by the backlog in people's in-basket how far behind they were. And that's a really good indicator of how they're doing emotionally. And so what we did is we set up a course because Kaiser Permanente is a value-based care organization. We set up a course where we took people out, we identified people either through their chief saying, this is the person you need to put in this course, or we'd look at their in-baskets or both and see who was most likely to be at risk of burnout and depression. And we took them out of clinic. We showed them how to be far more efficient. There are so many capabilities in Epic that the average user has no clue exists, and show them how to optimize their workflow and gain some time back so that they wouldn't have this huge gap between the volume of work and time they needed to expend and the time available. And we literally, and I've personally seen this many times, had physicians sobbing, saying, you saved my career by putting me through this course. So the reason I made the distinction between fee-for-service and value-based care is that fee-for-service, taking someone out of clinic for a couple of days, is very, very costly. In the value-based care world, we have many more levers to pull to make that happen. So we can do that in ways that most fee-for-service based organizations have a very hard time implementing economically. So again, we have the regulatory and structural incentives around healthcare are in no small part sustaining this burnout environment.
I was just say like the tools, the AI tools that people are developing can address this time issue, right? So if we're brought, the capability for everything we said in the clinic room to be put into a note automatically, if we're capable of,
Yes.
if I have, a ChatGPT for the chart where you say, look, show me the notes that are specific to today's visit, that are specific to the problem that we're trying to address, and what are the levers that we're looking at that need to be changed today, right? Automatically populating the note that I did this in my world is pain management procedures that I did and what things are working or not. But in everybody, there's a million different laboratory or factors that are specific to that person, but still take a lot of time to get to and understand, and you're spending like 5-10 minutes like looking at the chart and trying to track down where this information is. So I think there's a place for these tools that can improve performance and reduce the load and allow more time.
And it's right,
Motivation.
AI.
And I've mentored hundreds of startups, and when I first meet them, I say, if your solution doesn't reduce the cost of healthcare, find a different solution. If you can't find one, find a different problem. And in parallel, if it increases the burden on the care delivery team, find a different solution. If you can't find that solution, find a different problem and fix it in ways that lower the burden on the provider and lower the economic burden of healthcare delivery. There are so many good problems to tackle. I see lots of really ingenious startups that increase the cost of healthcare and increase the burden on the doctors. That's just not what we need right now. So all of you that are involved in entrepreneurship and mentoring and startups, if you see someone who's got a great idea and a lot of passion and they've got some money to pursue it and you can see how that's going to reduce the cost or reduce the burden on the healthcare team, help them find a better solution or a better problem.
Or at least put that in the presentation. I noticed that actually when I was looking at the presentations earlier today, I said, okay, it reduced XYZ, but where was the money spent? Like, what did you have? A lot more people getting lab tests, so now you have a much bigger lab test, even though it was earlier, or was it?
And that's good in a fee-for-service model, to have more
It
lab tests,
is, but it's not good
for the patient or the physician.
It's right.
Yeah.
It's not gonna work out. So that's a much bigger burden as well.
Just on that topic, I was just thinking about it. Can you, one of those startups that actually did lower the cost of healthcare? Because I can't think of one. that
Lower the
has
cost of
actually done
healthcare?
that. Yeah.
Well, early
Because
detection.
I'm sure conversations
so-
like this also happened about Epic and how it was going to be a boon for everybody.
Yeah.
It was going to be more efficient and it was going to help everyone. And obviously people have different experience.
You would have a hard time finding anybody who's been through our remedial course with Epic who would tell you that they aren't grateful for what Epic has done for their clinical practice. There's a whole lot of capabilities that people don't know how to utilize, and they're just fighting the machine rather than writing the machine.
But so one that lowered the cost of healthcare.
Yeah,
I'm
so
struggling with-
I'm coming back to that. So in the earlier discussions of sepsis, someone asked the question, well, that's a CMS metric. Why don't you pick something more meaningful? Well, it turns out that a lot of people die from sepsis, as Emmanuel indicated. And earlier detection and treatment of sepsis saves $1 bazillion. What Emmanuel's doing with the non-invasive vagal nerve sensor and producing a higher AUC and predictive value for early detection, starting antibiotics a couple hours earlier, let alone a couple days earlier, is profoundly helpful for clinical outcomes, for burden on the healthcare team and burnout, and cost as well. So that's probably one of the prime examples of where there's a there economically, clinically, and emotionally for burnout. And there are others like that, but that's probably the best example there is.
And sepsis doesn't, and actually a lot of these companies that are out there that are predicting sepsis with molecular biomarkers or physiological or EMR-based tools, oftentimes the go-to-market plan includes the amount of money that will be saved by lack of readmissions that you used to have, right? So preventing readmission, improving your value-based care payment for that particular hospital. So there's many of these companies, that's part of their model to save the hospital money, and you can show that you're going to save in the first year. I'm going to save you this amount of money, and because you're not going to be readmitting these patients that are going to die when they come back, and you're not going to eat that cost, right? So there's multiple different companies that have deployed that model to improve value-based payment, and then the cost, for the particular modeling system or the molecular marker. It depends on the company, and it depends on how widely they want to deploy it, right? And where they want to deploy it. Is it going to be in a hospital at home or otherwise for military use and whatnot? So I think that we have seen companies that are doing a $15 test and having a huge impact on reducing cost for this, what we talked about, endotyping and identifying patients that are at higher risk. So there are definitely companies that are providing low cost, but there's on the other end companies that are, doing exactly the opposite. So I think there's a panoply of differences and different types of companies out there that are developing these tools, and it depends on how much, how they got to market. Essentially, is really the factor of how much they have to charge.
And the other example that came up here today, in addition to sepsis and the work that Emmanuel's doing, is longevity. And people mentioned the $25,000 charge to get a whole body scan and the whole genome and 500 pages of interpretation and not much actionable often, and incidental illness further increase the cost. There's a whole lot of tech in the pipeline using very simple blood tests, urine tests that are not that costly. The price remains high, but with more competition, the price is going to come down because the cost is very low to identify organ-specific risks for individuals. I mean, there's just an explosion of biomarker testing that will be very low cost in order to help target those organ systems and those situations unique to that individual to extend life and lifespan and health span. They're not fully vetted in the market yet, but I know a whole bunch of them that are just going to have a huge impact, and you won't be getting a whole body scan and all that for $25,000. You'll get much better, much more useful, actionable information than that. There's a lot of companies in San Diego doing some of this work right now. I'm under NDA with a lot of really impressive stuff, so it's coming. It's coming.
Can I just ask, since we're in the design and innovation building, it's the building sort of focused on entrepreneurship at a student level here, right? I just think, first of all, when we think about AI in healthcare, let's not start with cost, right? The goal of a startup should not be reduce the cost, because I can guarantee you'll fail, right? It just doesn't work that way. In the healthcare space, we have a number of things in our portfolio that we're working on in healthcare, from early detection of skin cancer or musculoskeletal pain. And the goal of any of our sort of startups in the healthcare space are what? Ensure the person feels better, functions better, or lives longer, right? That's it. And then if we can solve for that problem, then we have something that we can solve for our own cost for. But if we identify a problem and say, this is too expensive, let's go find a way to do this cheaper, right? That's a very difficult business model to make work.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And one very last point, and then we're out of time. But if you haven't read The Blue Zones by Dan Buettner, read The Blue Zones by Dan Buettner. Healthy diet, exercise, sleep, and social support structures is why people in Sardinia and Okinawa and Costa Rica and Loma Linda have a very low incidence of Alzheimer's, a very low incidence of diabetes and heart disease, and longer health spans and longer lifespans. So a lot of what is funded and motivated in a fee-for-service model is what can I get a good margin, profit margin on, rather than how do I extend people's lives. So I would have been derelict in my my biggest passion in healthcare is we need to go back to basics and look at why people in those blue zones live longer. And anybody who hasn't read Dan Buettner or seen him on his Netflix specials, he's not a scientist, he's a great man. He's not a scientist, but what he did to elucidate how to live a long, healthy life is profound, and it's not by getting a blood test every other day.
There are no patents for that. So
There's no money in it.
that's not a startup I'm asking about.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to continue this conversation tomorrow. In fact, Scott, we have a venture capitalist flying down from Silicon Valley who focuses on cost reduction. Although one of our panelists says it's a tough thing, but there are investors who are funding that coming from the payer side. It's called Sandbox Ventures. So anyway, I appreciate all of you being here all day. Some of you have been here from before 8 o'clock, and so thank you for the volunteers like Stephanie and some others who are in the back for supporting us today. So tomorrow we're going to continue to have great presentations like today. In fact, a little bit more oriented towards entrepreneurship, translation. Today was more skewed towards AI, but I really appreciate all of you here. And thanks to the panel here and partners from Goodman and and Machani Robotics. And although we didn't see the robot today, but I'm sure if you've been in the campus, you've seen that. In fact, you may want to have a conversation and they may arrange a demo. I wonder, based on these conversations, if it might be a companion robot for the clinician.
At the moment, we haven't sort of gone that far, right? We're saying is trying to keep ourselves in an environment where if anything, she'll be a co-pilot.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
clinician. Remember, she's a multimodal model. She takes in more information than a human does because of her visual or perception system, right? And that can help assist the clinician in noticing things that they wouldn't otherwise see.
Right. So anyway, that's, you can have this conversation, continue to have this conversation, but I do want to be respectful of people's schedule here. We are a little bit past our 4:30, but see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock with a great keynote from our Dean of Biological Sciences, Dr. Kit Poliano, who's also an entrepreneur, and she's going to share her story. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So fun. Thank you guys.
Yeah.